Welcome back to another episode of Autism Family Life, bringing you all things autism, family, and life in 30 minutes or less. In this week's episode, we're going to continue our discussion on caregiving, and we're going to talk about ways to prevent caregiver burnout. But before we get to this week's episode, I just want to remind you to subscribe to the podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, or wherever, Spotify, or wherever else it is that you are listening from, and to tune in on YouTube if you prefer the videos. And just remember, if you are watching the channel on YouTube, that yes, I do batch record, so if it looks like I'm wearing the same thing for a couple of weeks, I am. So in this week's episode, we're going to kind of mix it back in, so it's a bit of the autism, the family, and life thing. And I want to talk about caregiver burnout, because for many of us as parents of autistic children, we often take on the secondary role of being a caregiver in addition to our primary role as parents. And for some of us, we are both primary parent and primary caregiver. So one of the biggest things that we need to be able to do with this is that we need to first distinguish and differentiate between what we're doing as a parent versus what we're doing as caregiver. And one of the main reasons we want to do that is so that we can figure out what we can then delegate to someone else in terms of what we're doing as caregiver. Now, because we are often the primary caregiver and the primary parent, we experience burnout, whether it's the parental burnout or the caregiver burnout, that much quicker. Because we feel like we can't always take a step back, or that we are being selfish if we're taking a step back. And this is one of those things that I think a lot of us struggle with, because we start to feel guilty about doing stuff for ourselves. We start to feel guilty about taking care of ourselves. And it's when we put it like that, it seems kind of silly to me that we would feel guilty about doing these things, because I'll give you that very common airplane stewardess or flight attendant analogy, in that when they're talking to you about the drop in, the case of the drop in cabin pressure and oxygen masks will drop down for your use, they tell you to put yours on first, and then to help children or people who may have more difficulties after you've put yours on first. And this needs to extend to caregiving and to parenting in general as well. We need to take care of ourselves first if we even think to be able to take care of our families. And we can't feel guilty about this, because I know so often we do. We feel guilty about putting ourselves first, or we might feel guilty about that self-care. But if we start ignoring that, then we're going to go into the caregiver stress stage. And sometimes the caregiver stress stage might happen more quickly than we realize. And we just kind of brush it off to those everyday things that are just kind of happening already. So, a couple of the signs of caregiver stress that we probably already feel on this day-to-day basis. You feel irritable, you might feel resentful towards what you're doing, you might start feeling really frustrated with things, you start to feel physically run down, and then you start doing things that are less and less for your own enjoyment. And this kind of chronic stress will eventually lead to caregiver burnout. So some of the things that happen with caregiver burnout is that you feel really exhausted because you're probably not sleeping enough. You're constantly getting sick because you're not taking care of yourself physically. You might have other, like headaches and other physical issues. And then you just don't have enough time to take care of yourself, and you may not feel like taking care of yourself. You may even start feeling like you're on the verge of experiencing some depression. And this was one of those things that happened to me almost regularly, because I wasn't asking for help, or when I was being given the opportunity to get help, I wasn't taking help. And this is one of those things, it was part of it for me was like a pride issue, like I had to do all of the things by myself, or I was the only one who was capable of doing all these things. And in reality, I needed to recognize that I had to take a step back. And I needed to recognize that I didn't always have to do all the things. And, sometimes it was about triage and it was about prioritizing things that were going to get done. And then, sometimes some things just weren't going to get done. So we want to talk about, how we can prevent this caregiver burnout. And one of the first things that you can do is to put yourself first on your priority list. And this is going to be one of those pretty difficult things for most of us to do, especially moms. But, parents, I think in general, is that we always feel this overwhelming need and this overwhelming urge to take care of everybody else around us and then take care of ourselves. But what we need to do is we need to take care of ourselves, because we're not taking care of ourselves. We can't take care of anyone else. So even if it just means, like taking a couple of minutes for yourself, or, taking some time at the beginning of the day to do something just for yourself, that's what you need to do. So, whether it's like meditation or listening to a podcast or taking a couple minutes for yoga, or, really focusing on your food and just enjoying the moment and being in that moment, you need to do something that's going to be really totally fulfilling for you. So another thing to do, which goes kind of hand in hand with putting your own needs first, is being able to take a break. And I am so guilty of this still. I tell myself all the time, it's like, oh, today's going to be the day where I take this meaningful an intentional break for lunch or for a snack, or just to, walk away from the computer. And then I don't. Most of the time, more often than not during the week, I have my lunch at my computer and I work through my lunch, or, I don't take my 15-minute breaks. But when you are in, a traditionally a job, you get the paid breaks and you get time for lunch. And there's no reason that being a parent or caregiver should be different from that. But I think because we don't associate like some kind of monetary value with what we're doing, we may feel like, okay, I don't have the time to do this, or it's just not the right time to do this, or I need to be doing something else. And for me, like my brain is always thinking, it's like, well, I need to be doing something just kind of to validate my existence and to kind of validate my role in what I do as a mom. When in actuality, taking these breaks and taking this time, it's not being selfish, and it's not undermining my value. It's not undermining my time. And I need to do these things. I need to take these breaks. I need to take this time for myself. I need to take the time to step back, because if I don't step back, then I don't know, it becomes even more difficult for me to step back later. And I think as parents, we are all pretty guilty of doing these things. And then, even when you can't take those extended breaks like you would, like a 15-minute break, if it just seems like a 15-minute break is way too much, then I would encourage you to start with like either 1 minute at a time or 5 minutes at a time. And during those quick breaks, just focus on getting back to yourself and try breathing. I know it almost sounds silly, but sometimes when we get so stressed out, and just even these simple things like reconnecting to our breath and, telling ourselves, like, take the deep breath in and then take the deep breath out, it forces you to slow down, and it forces you to concentrate, and it forces you to think. And those little mini breaks can be so huge. And this also goes hand in hand with taking the breaks. It's learning how to set boundaries and how to say no. Because, I'm that type of person where I have a very hard time saying no to people, and I have a very hard time saying no to things that I think, that I'm good at doing, or that I have the capability to do. And while, yes, it is true, I might have the ability and the capability to do these things, and I might have the resources to do these things, I don't always have the time or the energy to do these things. And as much as I would love to be able to help people and to help everybody and to do things for all people, I can't. Because there needs to come a point in time where I have to recognize that it's encroaching on my family's time, or it's encroaching on my own personal time. And I can't do that. I can't have my family taking a back seat to other pieces. And I can't always have myself taking a back seat to everything else either. And one of the things with setting the boundaries is that when you are saying no to someone else, you are saying yes to yourself. And I think once we start looking at it like that, it becomes a little bit easier, or at least slightly easier, to start saying no to others. And that doesn't mean you're always saying no, but it just means that you're not saying yes quite as much as you used to. And, another thing, a huge, huge thing here, and for myself in particular, this was a very hard pill to swallow. It's learning that, yes, it is okay to say that you need help. And then beyond learning to say that it's okay to say that you need help, it's knowing that it's okay to reach out for help. This is not a sign of weakness. This is not a sign of you not being able to do enough. You are more than capable of doing things. You are more than capable of handling life. But there's no weakness or no... It's not weakness at all to say that you need help, or to reach out to someone who can help you, or to accept someone's help. So even if it's, maybe not with like those direct things that involve the caregiving or the direct things that involve the parenting, if someone can take a load off of your day-to-day plate, then absolutely take that chance and take that window. So when it comes to the caregiving in particular, and this was one of those things that I talked about in last week's episode, which was all about preparing for your child's future. And that is looking at what you're doing as a parent versus what you're doing as a caregiver. And again, sometimes it might be difficult to discern and to differentiate between your role as parent and caregiver, but you really need to take a look. And one of the reasons behind that is because once you figure out what you're doing as a caregiver versus what you're doing as a parent, and beyond that, what your child is particularly depending on you doing for them, you can start to look for ways that you can outsource these things. So if it's an aspect of the caregiving, look for ways that you can outsource that. If it's an aspect of the parenting, look for ways that you can outsource that. And that also comes down to, like your home management and things like that. So if someone offers to cook you a meal, or maybe if you can find the time to meal plan and fill up your freezer, then that saves you time. And then you're saying yes to yourself, and you're saying yes to your family. And that might go a long way. It might even seem like more daunting and more intimidating to do the meal planning and to do all that. Trust me, it was not one of my favorite things to do either. So we don't really do it because it stresses me out. And that was just the other thing, is that if the thought of doing some other things to kind of save you time and to save you stress even adds more stress to your already stressful life, then just don't do it. Or, find other ways to do it and things like that. Because it's not worth it to keep compounding the stress, and it's not worth it to keep compounding all of the internal pressure on yourself. I think we're already hard enough on ourselves as it is. We really need to start giving ourselves a break from that. And again, it happens because I think so many of us are both primary parent and primary caregiver that we get so caught up in our roles, either as parent or as caregiver or as both. And then we just put this pressure on ourselves to say that, it needs to be me. I'm the one who needs to get it done, or I'm the only one who can get it done. And, maybe sometimes that is the case. I'm very fortunate that my daughter's father, even though we are divorced, he is still very much involved in her life. And then I'm also fortunate that my fiance is very involved. He does not participate much in, like the hands-on aspect for my daughter's caregiving, but he does pick up the parenting end with our daughter when I can't always be hands-on with her. And, I need to give my attention more to my autistic daughter. So he'll, he does some things here and there. He does what he can when he can. And that was just the biggest thing for me too, was learning to recognize that, yes, I do need help. And that, it's not a weakness to say, can you help me out here? Or can you just give me a break? And then that's just the other thing too, is that when you know that you need to take a break, ask. and find ways that you can take a break, even if it just starts with those 5 minutes where you're reconnecting with your breathing, or you're just, not even like reading a book or listening to a podcast or watching something on YouTube, or maybe really enjoying some food, going for a walk, or whatever it is that you need to do within those 5 minutes, within those 10 minutes, within those 15 minutes, wherever you are getting these pockets and these windows of time. That is when it is so important to just do something for yourself. And even though it may not seem like a huge amount of time, or that you may think initially that you could be doing something else, you need to remind yourself that you are doing exactly what you need to be doing at that moment, because your body is telling you that you need to take a break, and we need to stop ignoring our bodies. We need to stop saying no to ourselves because we think we're being selfish, or because we think that, we're the only ones who are capable of doing something. We need to take care of ourselves, and we need to say yes to ourselves, because it's not being selfish. By saying yes to ourselves, we are saying yes to our families. And when we are 100% and we are feeling better, and when we are on top of things, then we're that much better off as the role of parent or caregiver for our families. So I thank you for joining me this week, and I will talk to you again soon, and I hope you have an amazing week.